I'm working on a book. It puts together about 6 different ideas. And the summary of the book is that human beings experience the world in stories. And I want to combine the way we experience the world in stories with a model of how we experience emotions. And I want the book to describe how our lives have story arcs to them and how we build the story of who we are from the stories that we perceive, that we build up who we are from taking bits and pieces of other people and the values of the stories that we watch and hear and see, and we put those into our own lives. And so it will talk about how we mostly make attributions to ourselves a lot of the time to build our own stories, and it will work in some different parts. So I want to talk about those parts. So the first part is just this, which is called Godel's incompleteness theorem. And Godel's incompleteness theorem, it states that any mathematical system that is powerful enough to describe the basic arithmetic of whole numbers, there will always be some statements that can neither be proven nor disproven within that system. In simpler terms, the theorem states that no system of mathematics can be complete and consistent at the same time. This means that within any given mathematical system, there will always be some true statements that cannot be proven using the rules and axioms of that system. The theorem is named after Godel, an Austrian mathematician who proved it in the early 20th century. It is considered one of the most important results in the history of mathematics, as it shows that the quest for a perfect and complete understanding of mathematics will always be hindered by inherent limitations. This shows that math has limits, and it will always have limits. And so, similar to logic, because this first part is to show people who are very logical that their logic can only go so far. It's sort of within a bubble. Gödel's incompleteness theorem pops the bubble because it shows that everything's in a bubble. And so if you want to use logic, logic is sort of like trying to, some people think that logic is outside the bubble, but you know, everything's kind of in that bubble. And by bubble, I just mean set, because Gödel's incompleteness theorem talks about set theory. So logic is also within the set, in some sort of set. So that's a very basic explanation, but the first part of the book will be to just hopefully show that logic is not the be-all, end-all of stories, even though a lot of people love to think logically, which is fair. It's totally fair. But logic could never escape feelings, and it could never escape stories as well. So I'm making the jump to say that bubble or that set, that those are part of a story, and I'll get into them why later, but it's because they're representations in our mind, because we can only really think in representations or stories, but they're sort of the same thing. And this is jumping ahead, like I said, but all words really get their meaning from each other. I can talk about why in a minute. But the second part is Donald Hoffman's interface theory of perception. It's a psychological theory that suggests that the way we perceive the world around us is shaped by our mind's need for information. The theory posits that our perceptions are not an accurate representation of reality, but rather a simplified and streamlined version of reality that our minds construct in order to help us make sense of the world and make decisions more efficiently. In simpler terms, the theory suggests that our perceptions are like a user interface that we use to interact with the world, similar to how we use a computer interface to interact with information. The interface filters out information that is not essential to our survival and well-being and presents the remaining information in a way that is easy to understand and use. According to the theory, our perceptions of the world are shaped by our needs and desires and are not an objective representation of reality. Instead, they are a subjective interpretation of reality that our minds create based on the information that is most relevant to us. This theory challenges the traditional view that perception is a passive process that reflects objective reality. So this second one is really mind-boggling. If it sounds weird now, it gets weirder, and that's because it's so it's a very sound study that he did. It has great. It's got validity and reliability, so scientifically it's quite sound. But it's showing through an experiment that he did that based off game theory and well, I'm not too familiar with all the ins and outs, but I know that it was showing that people evolved for two things: reproduction and fitness. So reproduction, kind of everyone knows that or has a idea about that, because it wouldn't make sense that we were here if our parents didn't reproduce to produce us. And then the next generation wouldn't be here if we didn't reproduce to produce them. So that part makes sense. But what he's saying is that nowhere in that process is the truth involved. So we didn't evolve to experience the truth, and we evolved just to be fit to our environment, have a good fit, and for fitness. So that's what's important, that we fit in our environment well, and which allows us to reproduce, and that our perceptions are 100% geared toward that. So he shows that there's no probability, there's zero probability that we actually experience the truth, through our five senses. So I think that's very important. And then the third part to my book idea. Well, right now it's more of a collection of ideas, but it may be a book one day. The third part is Walter Fisher's narrative paradigm. This is a communication theory that suggests that human beings make sense of their experiences and the world around them through storytelling. According to Fisher, narratives serve as a framework for people to understand and give meaning to events, relationships, and values. In simpler terms, the narrative paradigm suggests that people use stories to explain and understand the world. A narrative is a sequence of events that are connected to one another and are told in a particular way to convey a message or make a point. The narrative paradigm suggests that stories are an important part of human communication and that they play a crucial role in shaping our perceptions and beliefs. Fisher's theory emphasizes the importance of narrative coherence, which means that a story should be logically and emotionally consistent. The narrative paradigm also highlights the importance of audience engagement, as a story only has meaning if the audience is able to understand and connect with it. Overall, Fisher's narrative paradigm provides a framework for understanding the role of storytelling in human communication and highlights the importance of storytelling as a means of making sense of the world. So for this one, I think this explains it quite well, but I want to show the list that he has. So Fisher made a list. And here's the list. So under his is a comparison, and under his, which is the narrative paradigm, it says humans are storytellers. Decision making and communication are based on good reasons. Good reasons are determined by matters of history, biography, culture, and character. Rationality is based on people's awareness of internal consistency and resemblance to lived experience. We experience a world that is filled with stories, and we must choose among them. And it's compared to the rational world paradigm. This one says that humans are rational. Decision making is based on arguments. Arguments adhere to specific criteria for soundness and logic. Rationality is based on the quality of evidence and formal reasoning processes. The world can be understood as a series of logical relationships that are uncovered through reasoning. So each of them is compared to the other one. So the first one says, in general, like the general idea is that humans are storytellers, that what we're doing is telling stories to one another. And then this one over here, it says that humans are actually rational. But Fisher is saying, no, that's not true. And I think this relates back to Godel's theorem, where people often think that other people are being irrational, but it's not true. We're all being irrational in some way. Some may be much more irrational than others, but that's really a matter of whether more people agree that that's true, So, for example, in a courtroom, and that relates to another point which I didn't include yet, but that's that the closest proxy of truth is interjudge agreement. So that's when, if we're all judging things, that's when more than one person agrees on something, what something is, or how events took place. And that's what makes things true. So examples of this could be old theories that are no longer with us or no longer taken as true. So there used to be theories about the world being at the center of the universe, which are now disproven, and they're only disproven because more people believe in them, believe in the evidence, and it's hard not to believe in the evidence because it seems irrefutable at this point. But at the time, the evidence for the world being the center of the universe seemed irrefutable at that time. So it's kind of difficult to see it this way, but things could change. So this is what Walter Fisher is talking about with his narrative paradigm. But the next one is to my book is David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness. So this is a model that describes the different levels of human consciousness, ranging from the lowest levels of fear and negativity to the highest levels of love and enlightenment. The map provides a framework for understanding the underlying motivations, thoughts, and behaviors that drive human actions and interactions. According to Hawkins, each level of consciousness is associated with specific emotions, beliefs, and values, and each level influences and is influenced by the levels around it. The map of consciousness ranges from the lowest level of shame and guilt to the highest level of enlightenment and unity. In simpler terms, the map of consciousness provides a way to understand the different levels of awareness and understanding that a person can reach. It provides a framework for exploring personal growth and spiritual development, and highlights the importance of moving towards higher levels of consciousness as a means of becoming more peaceful, loving, and fulfilled. Overall, David Hawkins' Map of Consciousness is a powerful tool for exploring the nature of consciousness and human behavior, and provides a framework for understanding the journey towards greater happiness and fulfillment. So this one, I think, is important because it's where emotions come in. And it brings emotions into this group of ideas that I have in a way that intuitively makes sense. Now, what I mean by that is I will show a picture of it. So it just looks like this. And it's got shame and guilt at the bottom, but then all the different emotional states are there. So he calls them name of level, and then he also has an emotional state with them, and then a view of life, so it's like a perspective thing. And when you think about it, it does make sense. So people who are very ashamed, they're at the lowest level. because shame is the lowest emotion. It's one where you're humiliated, you feel miserable, you view life as miserable. And so oftentimes that one, people can be stuck in it for a long, long, long time. And then there's also things like guilt. And when people are guilty, they feel like blaming, and then they may view life as evil. And then apathy, that's also a very low one, where people just feel a sense of despair about their life, that they may be stuck so low that they can't change, or that things are not able to change because they feel powerless and that everything is stacked against them. And so for their view of life, they may view life as hopeless. But as we go higher, we can see that the negative emotions, all on the lower half, they start to get a little fuzzy or blurred around pride, because some people view pride as a positive thing, but pride is over here. And then above it, you start to get into the higher emotions like courage, and then so on, up and up. And this just speaks to the way that people feel. So when you're neutral towards something, you trust it. And then the highest one is enlightenment. And this one is ineffable because you can't describe what the emotion feels like. And I've certainly never felt it. But life just feels at peace. Everything just is. There's no more need to describe life. It just is. And then so two more. So the last one is a story arc. So as I was describing this map of consciousness, I was sort of lightly describing a story for the person who is ashamed. I was sort of describing how they feel and why they might feel that way. So for these lower ones, I was giving those examples. But that was just part of a story. So a story typically has several key parts that help to create a complete narrative. The following are the most common parts of a story. So commonly, a story will have an introduction. This sets the stage for the story, introducing the characters and setting the scene. Rising action. This is the part of the story where the conflict or problems begin to emerge and the protagonist is faced with challenges and obstacles. Climax. This is the turning point of the story where the conflict or problem reaches its highest point and the protagonist must make an important decision or take action. Falling action. This is the aftermath of the climax, where the consequences of the protagonist's actions are revealed and the story starts to wind down. Resolution. This is the part of the story where the conflict or problem is resolved and the story reaches a conclusion. Conclusion. This wraps up the story, providing closure and tying up loose ends. It's important to note that not all stories follow this structure strictly, and some may include additional elements such as flashbacks or subplots. However, these 6 elements form the core of most stories and provide a useful framework for organizing a narrative. So you can see on here that oftentimes when you think about a story, let's just take a basic story. It will describe people or a character. Maybe it's a story of redemption, or depending on the story, They could be somewhere having like a happy family and then feeling love, or up here somewhere, and then something terrible happens and they lose their family, or someone takes it away and they just get stuck down here. And then there will be a lot of the story will be down here, and then they may work in the desire to make things change, to right the wrong that they felt, or somehow move past what happened. And then they can have a climax in the story, like the high point, where they have to take some action so that they don't drop back down into shame or despair or guilt, that they move up. So they need to have courage, and then they might move up, and then near the end of the story, around the resolution, they may realize that that their family would have wanted them to be happy, even if they're not there, and to keep moving forward and to keep spreading happiness. And so the story may reach love or joy up here, or reason, where they understand. So that's an example of a story. I just made one up. And it wasn't a great one or anything, but that's just one example. So now there are many smaller story arcs within that, or could be. And what we do as people is we pick up the values in our own lives and we play out some of these stories in our own lives from what we think our life is supposed to look like. And it can be stable, or it can change a lot, and we can be stuck in these low emotions where we're always trying to get out of them, and this may put us feeling like we're in helpless or despair or hopeless because we can't figure out how to get our emotional state up out of there. And so that can be really difficult and stressful. And also, we may be listening to too much of other people's stories, news, or media that's not helping us. And so we may be stuck down here, but just putting off our own stories and living through someone else's story. And our true story is stuck low, and that may be where we're at, because we haven't taken that action. Just like in the story arc, we may be stuck at the part where we have to take action and try something or do something. That's not to say all stories are like that. I want to give an example of an enlightened story. So mostly enlightened stories are all religious in some way. So I just want to give an example of a Zen koan. Let's try this one. Okay. Nanin, a Japanese master during the Meiji era, received a university professor who came to inquire about Zen. Nanin served tea. He poured his visitor's cup full, and then kept on pouring. The professor watched the overflow until he could no longer restrain himself. It is overfull. No more will go in. Like this cup, Nanin said, you are full of your own opinions and speculations. How can I show you Zen unless you first empty your cup? So this is an example of an enlightened story, and it's only one. There are many more. We can try one more, which is Psalm 23. And this one, if we were to look at it, I believe it would be around peace, somewhere closer to peace. And I don't know about enlightenment just yet, but it would feel perfect. And it does make me feel perfect when I read it. The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. Or I should find the King James. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. So that's a very beautiful story, passage of a story from the book of Psalms. And then the last thing is just like what I was saying at the beginning. Where do words get their meaning? And words get their meaning from the way they are used and understood by people within a particular culture or language community. The meaning of a word is shaped by the context in which it is used, as well as by cultural and historical factors that have influenced the way the word has been used and understood over time. Words can also gain new meanings or shift in meaning as a result of changes in technology, culture, and social norms. For example, the meaning of the word friend has evolved to include people you may know only through social media, whereas in the past the term was typically used to refer to people you knew in person. Ultimately, the meaning of a word is a social construct shaped by the collective understandings and uses of the people who use the language. While dictionaries can provide definitions for words, the meaning of a word is not fixed, but rather is dynamic and subject to change over time. So words actually do get their meaning from other words, and it makes it difficult to understand when you think about it. What words really mean. And so I've been doing some work with semantic models, and these are fantastic because they are able to reveal through large amounts of data the representations of meanings of words. And so this is very, very fascinating, and it's something I will be including in my book as well.